Thank you, Ken Corla. I want to start, and Minister, I mean no disrespect in this regard, but we expected the Minister for Health, Simon Harris, to be in this chamber this evening to answer questions from myself, Deputy Curran and Deputy O'Quailon. He's been on notice since Tuesday when the topical was first submitted. It was a reserved topical yesterday. I live on the other side of the country and I can be here this evening for this particular debate. So we will be raising this matter again and we will be demanding that Simon Harris present himself in this chamber and answer questions. And it will be well noted by the families and children waiting that he's not here. Minister, the drug was announced in June. Only 3 of the 25 children that need this drug, Spinraza, have actually received the drug to date. The HSE and the Minister are fobbing families off and are hiding, thinking they'll get away with it. One particular child that I'm helping in my constituency is Grace O'Malley. She was told in no uncertain terms that she'd have it by the end of October, just to hold on. She's now being told that she's a special case because of a spinal rod in her back, something that is no fault of her own, that she'll now have to wait until next year, that a new team will be needed and a new service will need to be put in place, and that funding will need to be applied for to put that service in place. I want to know, what does that say to a child like Grace who has no control over that ailment, that she now has to wait? And the question, Minister, is when will Grace and the other children receive this drug? When will the money be made available? We need a timeline and we need a date.
Deputy Quayle.
Yes, I agree. Mr. Harris never presents to be accountable to this House. The announcement, Minister of State, that Spinraza was to be approved by the HSE should have afforded the families of children living with spinal muscular atrophy hope and respite and a chance to plan for a future. Many of these families came here to Leinster House and stated with great dignity the impact that the denial of Spinraza had on their lives, and now a number have been forced to return. Since the 11th of June, the continuing denial of Spinraza to many of these children, now perhaps due to administrative and resourcing reasons, is still having that same devastating impact on these children and their families. The headline of the 11th of June is not the end game. If we are to go on the suggested data that only a small number of children currently have access to Spinraza, then quite clearly the government is failing children with SME. I want a clear answer as to the number currently in receipt of Spinraza and why it is that not all the affected children, those who are entitled to the opportunity to see if Spinraza will make a difference in their lives, why it is that they are not currently receiving it.
Minister, Sam and Glenn are 2 boys who live in Rathcoole and Clondalkin. They and their families were delighted and full of hope last summer when an agreement was made that the drug Spinraza would be made available to them. They had the realistic expectation that that drug would be administered to them over the summer holidays. And it wasn't. All hope has been withdrawn from them. There is no date of when it will be available, and they're very, very upset. You threw them a lifeline and it was taken away. There is no date for when that drug will be available. I asked the Minister a month ago how many children had received the drug, and at that point in time, none had. I understand that maybe 3 children have now received it. And we've raised it in this House, and we'll be fobbed off, quite simply, Minister, being told, oh, it's a complex condition and so forth. All of those facts were known last summer when the decision was made to make the drug available. Those children were identified last summer. It's not as though new children have appeared. And the reality is, Minister, that somewhere along the way there is a disconnect between the health service administering that drug in relation to the decision that was made by you and government, which we all welcomed. And today what we want to know specifically is how many children are currently in receipt and when will all of the remaining children start on the drug. As simple as that. And not to be fobbed off with complex issues and so forth. We all know that. What we want are the decision of this House, the decision of your government to be implemented and implemented immediately.
Minister.
Can I first of all thank Deputies Chambers, O'Quailon and Curran for raising this very important issue, and as far as I'm concerned, I'm here taking this on behalf of Minister Simon Harris. He gives his apologies and I will not fob anybody off. I fully recognise that spinal muscular atrophy places considerable strain on SMA sufferers and their families are anxious to see their children who suffer from this debilitating and painful condition to begin treatment with this medicine. In June 2019, Cancora, following a thorough review process and engagement with the manufacturer, the HSE leadership team approved access to the drug Spinraza for children with SMA, type 1, 2 and 3 on an exceptional and individualised basis. The actual patient assessment approval process is the means for determining access on the individual case-by-case basis to this complex and expensive treatment. Since July, 11 children have been approved for Spinraza treatment in Temple Street Hospital. 11 children. Application for approval is based clearly on defined criteria and clinical guidelines being followed in each case. Spinraza injected during a procedure known as a lumbar puncture. The actual delivery of this drug to approved patients in a safe and sustainable way requires very specific and quite complex service arrangements to be put in place. And there are two categories of patients with regard to the administration of Spinraza. First, for Category 1, where the administration of Spinraza is deemed not to be too technical difficulty, the consultant paediatric neurologist and lead clinician need to access to the day ward as the administration is performed under local anaesthetic. Each of these patients will also require physiotherapy, assessment, pre-administration and recovery time in the day ward. Category 2 are the more complex patients who have already undergone spinal fusion surgery and insertion of spinal rods, which makes the administering of Spinraza potentially more complex. For these patients, the delivery of Spinraza will require specialist care to include the input by the anaesthetist and the interventional radiologist, with associated nursing and the availability of capacity in the paediatric intensive care unit. It will be appreciated, therefore, that a considerable amount of service planning and assessment of patients at an individual level is required, Cancora, in order for treatment with Spinraza to be undertaken. The HSE has confirmed that the provision of auxiliary services to facilitate the administration of Spinraza to these patients is currently being worked on. Minister Harris has been advised by the HSE that 4 children are now receiving the Spinraza. 3 of these children were successfully started on Spinraza in Temple Street on 7th of November. The HSE has also confirmed that Children's Health Ireland is in discussions with colleagues about the 3 children's hospitals at Crumlin, Temple Street and Tala with regard to arranging a schedule so that the administration of Spinraza can be performed for approved patients. As part of this process, Children's Health Ireland is engaging on an individual basis with families involved regarding each child's treatment plan. Furthermore, the HSE has indicated that a meeting has now been scheduled between CH1 and SMA Ireland Advocacy Group at the end of November to discuss arrangements for the delivery of Spinraza. Minister Harris has asked to be kept updated on any further developments. And of course, Cancora, any of the concerns and issues raised today, I will immediately bring them back to Minister Simon Harris.
Deputy Chambers.
Minister, with all due respect, why are you here this afternoon to tell all of us what Minister Harris has been advised? Surely he should be here himself to advise what he has been advised. This suggestion that somehow this is new information, that administering the drug requires specific and complex service arrangements. Minister, do you know who told me that many, many months ago? The children themselves waiting. They could tell me all of this. They knew all of this in advance. We've known this since before June. Telling us here this evening in November, having the drug approved last June, that the HSE is currently working on the facilities to administer the drug. What comfort or reassurance does that give to any child waiting on this drug? 4 children now receiving the drug. 3 of them only started this month, Minister. Why was the drug approved to great fanfare last June? It seems Minister Harris is quite keen to get the stress and pressure off his back. He'll say whatever he needs to get out of a sticky situation. Making announcements of that nature, getting people's hopes up, and then not delivering is just cruel. We want to know in this House, when did the Minister become aware that a new service and new team would be required to administer this drug? When will the budget be made available to administer this drug? And when will the remaining children receive Spinraza? We want a date, we want a timeline, not more broken and empty promises and no delivery.
Deputy O'Quayle.
I got Karen Corrier. Minister, with respect, after the passage of so many months, and here we are facing into Christmas, and for the greater number of these families, there has been no real delivery. I noted from the reply that you've read into the record, 11 children have been approved, but then you went on to clarify that only 4 have actually been lined up, and perhaps even only 3 are currently in receipt. There's an uncertainty in relation to this. I would like to put on the record that I understand and appreciate, as the families do, the wonderful work that Dr. Declan O'Rourke, who is the prescribing specialist doctor in relation to SMA children at Temple Street Children's Hospital, that he is doing Trojan work. But he and the hospital are denied the infrastructure and support in order to carry out a much greater throughput of those at least 11 children initially. We need to see all of the children given the opportunity for trial as to how Spinraza will work for them, and pray God it will make a difference for them all. That would be all our hopes, as would be their families' hopes. Minister, I'd ask you to reflect the frustration and the vexation of the members of this House to the Minister for Health for the failure to move this forward with the speed it requires, and his failure once again to be accountable to this House on this particular important matter.
Thank you, Deputy. Deputy Corrin.
Minister, you and I go back a long way, but this is an appalling answer. It really and truly is. And I know you're delivering it for the Minister for Health and it's not your own, but it's absolutely shocking. These parents had the realistic expectation that within a number of months of having the drug approved, their children would be in receipt of it. It is a degenerative condition. Each child today is in a poorer condition than they were last summer, and this drug should have been administered by now. You set out the 2 scenarios for the 2 types, and you indicated for type 1 that it required access to a day ward. Surely to God, in this country, in this day and age, we can have access to a day ward to administer this drug to these children. Even the more complex cases should have been dealt with by now. And I note that you made a strong point of saying 3 children were treated on the 7th of November. I wonder if we, back in October, had not brought to the floor of this House that no child in October had received the treatment, would any children be receiving it? We're not satisfied with this answer. And you can tell the Minister that this House and members of this House and colleagues will continue to raise it until we get a straight answer. And what we want to know is, without going around talking about the complexity of the case, because this was all known back in June, when will all of those children receive their initial doses of this drug, Spinraza? And are there other issues going on behind the scene that we're not aware of? Is the budget in place, or are you trying to defer it until next year? But honest to God, Minister, the families and the children themselves are aware that their condition is deteriorating. Their expectation and their hopes, we have to do better. And this answer, Minister, and I hope your supplementary answer is more positive and more detailed and more specific, because we will bring it back here.
Minister.
I say, first of all, there's nothing else going on behind the scenes, and as far as I'm concerned, I fully recognise this is a very important time for patients, their families and carers. And in relation to the answer to the question, 11 children have been approved for Spinraza treatment in Temple Street Hospital, and 4 patients have received the treatment on the medicine to date. 3 of these started on the 7th of November at Temple Street, and this is the key sentence here. There is no definitive timeline for the schedule of treatment for more complex cases. So what I'm saying is the complexity of this treatment requires appropriate service arrangements to be put in place in Temple Street, so to ensure that the treatment and delivery of this medicine is conducted in a safe and sustainable way appropriate to the standard of care which has been developed for the particular treatment. And while I hope that access to this treatment will be provided shortly for all concerned, it is important to note that I, or Minister Harris, has no role in relation to how clinicians manage the care of individual patients. All decisions are entirely a matter for the treating clinician in line with the patient safety protocols and guidelines which are currently being developed by the HSE to administer Spinraza. But of course, the issues you raised today, I will, Cancorla, bring them back to Minister Simon Harris. Thank you.
Minister, that is appreciated. The second important item is from Deputy...
Just a point of order and just a point of inquiry. Is the Minister required to even explain as to why somebody is here to deputise for them, or are members of this House supposed to just accept when somebody just doesn't bother to turn up?
Well,
like, we're all here. Is that...
Can I just explain?
Yes, please. Thank you, Ken.
Completely appropriate for a minister to delegate a Minister of State from his or her own department to take a topical issue. There's nothing unusual about that, I'm afraid. If deputies are unhappy, they can register a complaint with me in relation to the answer or the lack of availability of the Minister, and we will attempt to assist. Deputy